Hello everyone, this is the Lifestyle Training and Education Center. My name is Todd. A little disclaimer today for this presentation. I would like to point out that while this is the Lifestyle Training and Education Center, this is me, and we are not one and the same thing. At Lifestyle, we do encourage debate on a variety of topics as long as it is done respectfully, and this is a presentation I did outside of my employment here at Lifestar in my role as a firefighter in a paid-on-call fire department in another county. And the purpose of this discussion was to make a controversial statement in order to get a discussion started and an argument and see if I could get anyone to defend the other side. If you disagree with me and you think you can make a case for the other side, fantastic. That's what I'm looking for. I encourage you to put respectful and well thought out arguments in the comments section. Or you could just sit there and complain. Your choice. This presentation is a repeat of a presentation I was asked to do a couple weeks ago by a member of the fire department in which I serve. We were organizing what was to be called the EMS Happy Hour, which was about 50 or so people getting together online to engage in some discussions or debate or training. And the instructions were to pick a topic that's either humorous, unusual, or controversial in order to get a discussion going. We didn't want your typical, here's a presentation on diabetes, or here's one on how to properly bag valve mask somebody. We wanted topics that you don't traditionally get in your ho-hum boring online training. So I came up with this topic: why you should never park your ambulance at a fire station, or how to piss off an entire county full of EMTs and paramedics. It wasn't really my goal to piss off the entire county, but I was trying to get an argument started. And I started my presentation by explaining that this is a polemic. A polemic is not a debate in which you have to present both sides of the issues, do a fair and even comparison, and come to some sort of logical conclusion at the end. A polemic is an argument. It's usually contentious, it's rhetorical, and it can be somewhat controversial. In fact, they usually are. So I picked a controversial argument that I wanted to start and see what kind of answers I would get from all of these paid-on-call volunteer firefighters. And the assertion I made in my argument is that the fire service is no longer the best home for EMS. At one time it may have been, but right now it does not serve our occupation well at all to be affiliated in any way with the fire service. My first argument is that EMS has come a long way from when ambulances looked like this and paramedics were these guys. You remember, if you ever watched Emergency, our heroes, the firefighters, would come in and do their EMS, and then these two guys dressed in white would drive up in the ambulance. They're faceless, they never had a line, they never spoke. And their job was to pick up the patient, put him in the back of the ambulance, and if any more medicine had to be done, one of the firefighters would come along. We've come a long way from that model of EMS. So let's take a quick peek at what the fire service looks like today. These numbers are from the NFPA survey that ended in 2018, so this is recent data. And the important number on this screen is in the lower left, that 29,705 fire departments in the United States. Now, the definition of all or mostly career in the NFPA definition here was departments in which 51 to 100% of their personnel are full-time career firefighters, and all or mostly volunteer are anywhere from 1 to 50% of the department were volunteer, which would include paid-on-call volunteer, but not career. So less than half would be career people. Typical in the county in which I serve, you have the chief of the department is frequently full-time, and everyone else is paid-on-call. That would be a combined department, which would be mostly volunteer. There are a couple departments that also have one or two more full-time members, but overwhelmingly we're talking about volunteer fire departments in the county in which I was giving this presentation. So nationwide, you can see that when it comes to career departments, 18% are mostly career and 82% are mostly volunteer. Now, when it comes to the percentage of the population that is served by those departments, the majority gets flipped, and 68% of the population of the United States is served by a mostly career department, and 32% is served by all or mostly volunteer departments. And that's because career departments tend to be in higher populated urban areas, and volunteer departments tend to be in the lower population areas. And since we're a very urban country, it's not surprising that the majority of the population is served by career departments. And here are the trends from 86 all the way through 2018. And you can see that the red line on the bottom is career fire departments. And those career fire departments, when you do the math and calculate the number of firefighters per 100,000 population, stay pretty much the same. And that makes sense, because when you're building a career fire department and you're deciding how many people to hire, basically it's a formula based on the population of the community. So that number you would expect to be horizontal. The real trend here in the downward trend is in volunteer firefighters, where you can see from 1986 down to 2018, there is a steady downward trend in the number of volunteer firefighters in this country. This graphic looks at the departments that provide any kind of EMS and then what kind of EMS they provide. And on the left end of the chart, where you have the highest population cities, you'll see that they do provide EMS, and it's all ALS in communities of 1 million or more in population. And as you go down in population, you'll see the proportion of departments that provide BLS services instead of ALS increases. And as we get to communities below 250,000, you start to see an increasing percentage of departments that provide no EMS whatsoever. And that bar all the way to the right is the average for all communities nationwide. So this is a total of the number of firefighters, either career or volunteer. The 370,000 are career firefighters in this country, and that's through 2018, and 745,000 paid on call or volunteer firefighters nationwide, for a total of about 1.115 million. The numbers in red are the percentage of women represented in those groups, and you'll see that it looks like among the volunteer fire departments, women are doing better. It's still a small percentage, but they're doing quite a bit better in representation in the volunteer fire departments than they are in the career fire departments. Here's the real dramatic change from 1980 all the way through 2018. You'll notice that fire calls, the red line at the bottom, has a little bit of a slow downward trend, fewer and fewer fire calls over that, but the real increase here is in EMS calls. So that's nationwide. Let's take a look at what EMS looks like in the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin has about 375 ambulance providers. There are about another 50 agencies that provide EMS response, but they don't transport those patients. They hand off to one of these other 375 providers. There are about 1.5 million transports a year, and that mathematically comes to about 4,100 transports a day. Interesting fact, of that 1.5 million transports, 40% of all of them are done by these 10 agencies. These 10 agencies work in high population areas for the most part, but that is a tremendous disparity in the amount of EMS that is done by just these 10 agencies when there are 375 total agencies providing transports. So, who owns the ambulances in Wisconsin? Who's doing all this EMS? You'll notice that volunteer fire departments are about 19% of all the ambulances that are provided in the state, and career fire departments are about 13%. Hospitals run another 9% of the ambulance-based services. Their counties do about 6%. 53% of all the ambulances running in this state are standalone, which would be privately owned or nonprofit or third sector, where they're independent districts rather than being government-owned ambulances. So over half are standalone. So let's take a look at what my arguments are for why the fire service is just not the best home for EMS anymore. And the first reason is we're different. EMS is just not the same as fire. It's different personality, different people, different skills, different jobs. Now, there are still some similarities. Both fire and EMS, for example, do engage in rapid response to emergencies. We both have to engage in on-the-spot problem solving. We walk in the door, we have no idea what we're going to be confronted with, and whatever we see, we got to solve the problem because ain't nobody else coming to save the day. Both involve preparing for a hazardous environment. We have to be familiar with the hazards of the job and the PPE and the techniques necessary to keep us as safe as possible. Both are a public good. If you remember from your economics class, a public good has the characteristics of being indivisible. I can't point to which particular part of fire protection or law enforcement or EMS that belongs to me as a taxpayer. Belongs to everyone together. It's indivisible. And it's also non-excludable. If I make the 911 call, we come, period. We can't exclude individuals from these goods. They belong to everyone. And then both services are really good at integrating and cooperating with multiple jurisdictions. This is something I'm very proud that both fire and EMS are way better at this than even law enforcement. Law enforcement is getting better at interagency cooperation, but they still basically only work really well with the agencies in which they interact on a regular basis. Whereas I can pick up a member of the fire service and move them to another county on the other side of the state for an incident, and they're going to understand the incident command system. They're going to know that there's an incident commander and an operations and a safety person. They're going to understand what staging is and how to get on the right radio frequencies. We're just better at multi-agency response because we practice it and prepare for it so much. What are the differences? Well, that first difference is the level and quantity of training that's required for entry into the field. Way different for EMS. Take a look at this. Your typical newspaper ad hiring a firefighter for a career fire department would require that you be let's just assume it's for a paramedic department. That's becoming the standard of service almost everywhere. So they require that you have your EMT and your paramedic training, and Fire 1 and Fire 2. That's the most common advertisement for a full-time career to apply to one of those departments. Take a look at that amount of training, though. That's 92% of all that training is all EMS, and only that 8% is related to fire. So you have to spend an inordinate amount of your time getting the EMS stuff under your belt, and the fire stuff is nearly nothing. Now, you might say, well, let's take a look at the more advanced, because that's just entry level. Let's take a look at Fire 1, Fire 2, Driver Operator Pumper, Driver Operator Aerial, and Fire Officer 1. We add all those requirements in order to have a more rounded candidate and a candidate that's ready for advancement, and 75% of the training is still paramedic, plus another 10% for EMT. 85% of the training in order to be that class candidate is all EMS, and only 15% is fire related. So I do talk about how the role of prevention is diminished as well on the EMS side. Some people are going to say, well, what about mobile integrated healthcare? We do get out there and we do prevention. Yeah, there is a little bit of prevention on the EMS side, but on the fire side, the role of prevention is way bigger. You have whole programs and departments dedicated to fire inspection, fire code enforcement, all these prevention activities. That does not even begin to equate with what we do on the EMS side. Continuing education requirement for recertification is far greater on the EMS side. This is what it takes to get your license renewed in EMS in the state of Wisconsin. This is your refresher, continuing education, plus whatever level of CPR you have to have recertified every 2 years. So in the EMT, it would be just EMT basic, refresher, and then your BLS CPR. Same is true for AEMT, and then paramedic, you would have to add your ACLS and PAL certification. So for a paramedic level, you're talking about 54 hours ongoing every 2-year continuing education, way higher for the critical care paramedic. And then there's what it takes to renew your license as a firefighter, 0 hours. There are no refresher, no continuing education requirements. Now, that doesn't mean they don't train, but it's not required by the state to keep your license. The level of sophistication of skills and knowledge required for street-level practice. Now, when I'm talking about street-level practice, I'm talking about going out there, not command, not being in charge. On a fire scene, you're going to have a chief that's the incident commander, or a battalion chief that's the incident commander. You're going to have a whole series of officers that are making decisions about strategy, whether you're going to be in attack or defensive mode on a fire, where you're going to stage. All those important decisions are being made by officers, and the firefighters, the street level people, their job is to do what they're told. Now, you do have to have a certain amount of knowledge about how to safely enter a building and do an attack and do a search. There's definite knowledge and training and skills involved, but when it comes to street level practice, the level of sophistication of those skills is very low, and you're not operating independently. You're following orders. On the EMS side of things, it's a whole different ballgame, because when you go out there in your ambulance, you are alone. There's no chief or battalion chief standing over your shoulder. Nobody's making the big strategic decisions. You're deciding how to extricate the patient, how to assess the patient, how to treat them, where to take them. You're operating independently. So at the street level, your knowledge base has to be much higher, much more comprehensive, much more sophisticated. And then the workload, we already looked in that chart about where the big changes in trend are. 75 to 85% of all fire department calls are EMS related. That's where the work is. So reason number one, the jobs are different. I think we are far better suited by separating from the fire service so we can focus on the training and the issues that are important to us. There's no reason why 80% of your training should be how to put out a fire when 80% of what you do is EMS. And that is a disparity that exists in fire departments everywhere. So reason number two, they don't want us in the fire service. The fire service has overwhelmingly negative orientations toward EMS. There is a corollary, which is they do want the money. Fire departments know what pays the bills. They know where the money is, and they know in order to justify their personnel and the number of people they want to add to their departments, they have to be talking EMS, 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 and all the EMS calls they're running. They also want the billing. Typical fire department in the county in which I work bills between $400,000 to $500,000 a year. That's a large proportion of an overall fire department budget. That could easily sustain an EMS department without tax dollars paying for everything else. So reason number 2, they don't want us. These firefighter attitudes toward EMS are overwhelmingly negative. Now, there are not a lot of studies that do random research where you survey firefighters across the country to ask them about EMS. There's not a lot of payoff for fire chiefs to agree to let researchers come in and ask their people questions about the EMS function. So that evidence tends to be anecdotal, not survey research. Anecdotal are case-by-case encounters, stories, personal experiences that kind of summarize what we believe to be trends throughout the industry. So I would ask, how many people listening to this presentation work in fire departments that have fire-only people, EMS-only people, and then people that fit both categories? It's not uncommon. And what proportion of all of those people are in that both category? Because most paid-on-call fire departments have a large number of firefighter-only, a small contingent of people who do the overwhelming amount of EMS, and then a smaller portion of people who do both. And how many people can think of experiences you've had with firefighters who clearly hate EMS, don't want anything to do with it, think it's either a waste of time or just gross, and they don't want anything to do with the EMS function of the department? And how many people who are in those kind of departments also feel if you're EMS only, you're not quite a full member of that department? That the fire people look at the EMS only people as just a little bit less than a full member of the fire department because they're not out there doing the fire stuff. Very, very common. So here's an example of a large metropolitan fire department which announced that they were going to begin integrating EMS with the fire side so that firefighters would be responding to EMS calls. It was going to be just one department, not EMS and fire, but one department responding to all their EMS calls and complete integration of the function. And this newspaper article describes the plan, and it describes the reactions. And some of the quotes from the article, the rank and file are angry at the mayor and at the department and at their own union leadership. They joined the department to fight fires, not to be doctors. The medical training is too difficult. The books are too thick. To learn about the cardiopulmonary system is too taxing. And they're just forcing us to race into our turnout gear through the streets only to find people waiting with suitcases packed, waiting for their free trip to the hospital. How many of us have seen that 100 times? And the article concludes that there have been charges and countercharges and widespread grumbling and some open revolt, but the department's top officials are saying there is no turning back. We are going to integrate fire and EMS together. This fire department is FDNY, and the article is 25 years old. It was originally published in 1995. And 25 years later, the EMS and fire functions are still separate functions in FDNY. Still couldn't get the firefighters to buy into the EMS function. Just a couple months ago, one of the fire lieutenants for FDNY, Anthony Almoyera, was interviewed about the COVID-19 response. And he was introduced by the interviewer who didn't know how separate the functions are. They just said that Captain Almoyera is a New York firefighter. And before he could answer any of the questions that they were posing about COVID-19, he felt that he had to start off his response by reminding them that he is a captain with the EMS section. He said he's not a firefighter. And he said those guys would get pretty mad if you grouped me in with them. So here he is, worried he's going to get in trouble when he goes back to his office because he got introduced as a firefighter. and firefighters in New York would never want anything to do with the EMS stuff. This is Captain Elmo Yera, and listen to what else he has to say about being a member of this department.
There's been a lot of issues with EMS. EMS has to be an essential 911 component, and I'll give you what the concerns of the members are. We all signed up for a job where we can get sick and possibly die. We've had lost members who have contracted diseases and died. We want to make sure that while we're taking care of the citizens of New York, we're going to be taken care of.
Yeah.
Right now, EMS in New York City gets 12 sick days a year. The other uniformed services get unlimited sick. Think about that as we're treating sick people. And the other thing is, if I die on this job, which is always a potential, my family only gets 3 years of my benefits. The other uniformed services get them for life.
Wow.
So EMS has been disregarded for years, and I really hope that after all this, in the cities and the nation's time of need, we correct that.
12 sick days for the EMS guys, unlimited for the fire guys, 3 years of benefits after a line of duty death on the EMS side, a lifetime of benefits for the family of the firefighters. Just a complete disparity and a complete disrespect for the EMS function. 25 years after they said they were going to all be part of the same team. Now, is this just happening on the East and West Coast and in big city departments? No. In Wisconsin, we see this same kind of disregard and disrespect for the EMS function. Assembly Bill 311 was a proposal to allow rural ambulance services, that's any ambulance service whose largest population in their service area is under 10,000 in population, to flex their level of license to the highest level of license available to staff that ambulance. That would allow communities, and many communities are suburban to large urban areas, and they still count as rural departments. And it would allow these departments, if they had a paramedic available, they could run that ambulance as a paramedic, not have to require paramedic intercepts from other communities for the higher acuity calls, and they could send that ambulance out and it could run a paramedic call as long as they had a paramedic available. And when they don't have a paramedic available, it drops down to the next lower level of service of license that they have available. This would be a tremendous asset for these departments to be able to provide the highest level of care that they can without having to make sure that they have 24/7 staffing at the highest level of license. That's an important adjustment to make it easier to provide EMS in the state. In Wisconsin, if you're going to lobby our legislature, you have to register with the Wisconsin Ethics Commission, and you have to report the number of hours you spend lobbying for and against bills. On Assembly Bill 311, it was supported by the Wisconsin EMS Association and by ThedaCare and the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. Who opposed Assembly Bill 311? The Professional Firefighters of Wisconsin. Professional Firefighters of Wisconsin are the IAFF. Same thing. They just have their Wisconsin chapter called PFFW. There are no career fire departments in Wisconsin that are classified as rural. This piece of legislation doesn't change operations for any career fire departments in the state of Wisconsin, but those are the ones who lobbied against Assembly Bill 311. Not only did they lobby against it, but they spent more hours lobbying on this issue than any other organization in the state. All this information available online from the Wisconsin Ethics Commission report. Fortunately, although they opposed it, Assembly Bill 311 did pass. But why did they oppose it? Well, you'll remember in the earlier graphic, the overwhelming majority of ambulances in the state are third party, not fire-based. And so the Professional Firefighters of Wisconsin have an official position that they are opposed to EMS that is not fire-based, and they want to fight it wherever they get a chance to. So they went out there and tried to make it harder for the overwhelming number of fire departments in the state to provide EMS in order to protect their position that all EMS should be fire-based, even though none of them were even affected by Assembly Bill 311. That's all anecdotal stuff. There is actual research on firefighter attitudes as well. It's not randomly selected sample and generalizable to the whole population. It's what's called ethnographic research. And ethnographic studies involve things like embedding your researcher in the organization so that they can study it from the inside. That's exactly what Tracy and Scott did in 2007, where they wrote this chapter in the book Dirty Work, and the chapter was entitled Writing Fire Trucks and Ambulances with America's Heroes. And what they did is they embedded their researcher in a major metropolitan fire department on the West Coast. If you read the study, you can kind of figure out who it is. It's not important. It's a fairly typical career fire department. And the author conducted ride-alongs with crews at 4 stations. He helped with the station chores. He helped with responses. He observed training. He ate meals with the crews. And then he went out on engine, truck, and ambulance calls for service. And they discuss in this article taint management, which is not what you're thinking. Taint management is an organizational behavior and organizational psychology term, which refers to how professions deal with the unsavory parts of their jobs. EMS and fire and policing all deal with unpleasant things and unpleasant people and unpleasant incidents. And we develop taint management strategies for dealing with those things in order to make our orientation towards our jobs much more positive. Now, taint management in EMS looks something like this. We've all seen this meme. This is one of my favorites. And this is kind of an embracing of our dark sense of humor and the way EMS crews interact with each other, and the fact that we like this dark humor, and we don't mind some of the things that we're exposed to as EMTs. We in fact embrace it. That's taint management. This is another form of taint management in EMS, where we talk about the stress levels in their job. We make fun of all the stress that we experience. If you do interfacility transports, you probably appreciate this form of taint management as well. So taint management is important in terms of the kinds of things that we do address, but it's also, from a research standpoint, important and what does not get managed, what we don't justify or embrace in our jobs. And the firefighters here were rejecting EMS. They often complained about the dirtiness of the work of EMS. Think of this, firefighters crawling through burning material into a building, coming out covered in soot and smoke, but they're complaining about the dirtiness of EMS work. They engage in taint management for the fire stuff, and then they don't engage in taint management for the EMS stuff. They describe EMS and firefighting as a bad marriage, and they say that that despite the frequency of their time spent on EMS calls, they very rarely spoke of EMS in those positive terms. And they even had stories of paramedics that were forced to eat at different tables than the firefighters at the stations because they didn't want to hear the EMS stuff. They only want to talk about fire stuff. One of the firefighters described firefighting as riding down a hill on a bike really fast, maybe even with your hands off the handlebars, and being on the ambulance is like fixing the bike. It's okay, but it's not nearly as much fun. You're not a hero in an ambulance, in other words. You can only be a hero on the fire side of things. So reason number 2 is they don't want us, they don't like us. Reason number 3 is forward-looking, in my opinion, and that is our development as a profession. EMS has been described as being in transition ever since I joined 11 years ago. I've been told a million times, oh, we're transitioning, we're going to become an allied healthcare profession. We're on our way to becoming a profession. As soon as we resolve a certain number of obstacles, we're going to become this freestanding independent profession. I've heard it ever since I joined EMS, and I don't see a lot of progress in that direction. The goal, however, for many people in EMS is for us to be an allied healthcare profession on the same par with nursing and respiratory therapists and other disciplines that are recognized as independent professions. This is where we'll begin to see an increase in status and an increase in pay and an increase in recruitment and retention. I would refer you to the American Paramedic Association's manifesto on the topic of being an allied healthcare profession and how to get there. The key to advancing our wages and our benefits, and therefore recruiting more and better people and retaining the people who come to us, is in becoming an independent healthcare profession. The National Highway Transportation Safety Administration in 2008 did a survey of the workforce, and they found that wages, benefits, and opportunities for advancement were critical reasons why people become dissatisfied with EMS and why they leave the profession. Here you see top among EMTs and paramedics: compensation, benefits, and advancement opportunities. So the suggestion on how to correct for this and how to advance yourself and become a profession starts with a degree requirement into entry into the field. And they start with a very modest proposal at the APA of an associate's degree. I personally would say you need a bachelor's degree in order to be considered a profession. That is what nursing is requiring of nurses. They want not just a bachelor's degree, but a BSN. I think down the road we need to see paramedics having bachelor's degrees as well. They also advocate for the establishment of an American College of Paramedicine. That would be an umbrella organization that would include the NREMT, which is just about certification, COAEMSP, which is about accreditation, NHTSA, which is about writing the curriculum for paramedicine and EMTs, and the National Association of EMS Officers, which is about the training. We need an American College of Paramedicine that encompasses all of those functions together and really drives paramedicine as a profession. Who opposes education requirements? I'll give you one guess. The IAFF. Anytime there's been any major proposal to require a degree in order to be a paramedic, the IAFF has come out against it. So, summarizing the arguments, the fire service is no longer the best home for EMS because the skills and the education and the continuing education requirements make us different and better served as a separate entity. The second reason, they don't want us. They make it very clearly they don't want us. They want the money, but they don't want us. And third, the fire service is the one standing in the way of EMS ever becoming an allied health profession. They're perfectly happy with the way things are. They want to pay for their big red trucks, and the best way to do that is to put people who never wanted to be paramedics and never wanted to do EMS into the back of an ambulance against their will and shove them out the door to run those calls. And once they're there on the department long enough to earn the right, they can finally earn their way off the ambulance and stop doing what they don't like doing anymore. But the thing is, 75 to 85% of all those 911 calls are for EMS. And if that's the overwhelming majority of what you're doing, isn't it about time we start hiring people who want to do it?
Well, there you go. Those are my arguments for why the fire service is no longer the best home for EMS. If you have arguments to refute me, or if you have any ideas you want to share, the comments are down below. Thanks for coming by, and I'll see you on the next one.